Welcome to the podcast, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time, a CADSource production. In this episode, I chat with Shondell Varcianna, owner of Varci Media. From the mortgage industry to owning and managing a writing company, from Toronto, Ontario to Atlanta, Georgia, from a stable world to a pandemic. We discuss these transitions, mindset, and a lot about content, a topic we are, of course, all about at CADSource. But let's get right into this episode and welcome Shondell Varcianna. This episode exists because of CADSource. CADSource is your content team. You know how many business leaders need help communicating their story? That's what we do. Content strategy, creation, and distribution for business leaders. This provides opportunities, relationships, and a platform for you and your business. Why do we do this? Because at CADSource, we exist to help you create and share amazing content. And yes, you should have a podcast. We'll help you. Learn more by visiting CADScontent.com.
Your background with finance, banking, mortgage industry, and then into content, obviously, and you probably saw this, but I have a similar story in different ways on the insurance side. I did insurance brokerage for many years, and we still have an insurance brokerage company that we run. And I realized, or I've been realizing, I guess, for a while, that the story, that the messaging, that just the just anything that I didn't know what content meant at this time, it's just missing something. In the insurance industry, it's just in mortgage and finance, banking, all of it. It's just missing something. Like, it's so corporate. They're so like product driven and benefits driven. And you're like, oh, I'm so bored by this. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Or when you go and talk to someone and you're trying to make a connection with someone, I'm going to tell you how good I am. And here's our benefits and here's our services. I'm just so bored by all of it. Yeah, I was bored by all of it. Yeah, you have to have this connection. It's just people. I don't care if it's a huge business and there's a board of directors. There's 12 board of directors. I always say there's 12 people on that board, and they all have their own interests. And some like to travel, and they like to go to Canada, or they like to go play sports outside, or they like to go hiking. Whatever those things are, that's how you make this, like you said, this connection. Yes. And so I started writing. I started creating content, and it was a lot to do with sports and business. So we created Sports Epreneur. Well, it was interesting because I didn't have this thing of like what this is going to become. Well, people were intrigued by that. And they're like, well, what are you doing? And some people might have been turned off by it, which we'll get into because it's like getting to the niche. Not turned off, but maybe they weren't interested by it.
But that's good.
Okay.
That's good because they're not for you. They're not for you. There's nothing wrong. That's part of the reason why I started doing video, because it makes it easier for people not to like me. Because if you don't like me,
I love it.
We don't need to do business together. I mean, there's nothing wrong. There are almost 7 billion people on this planet. Everyone is not going to like you, and that is okay. You don't want everyone to like you. Everyone doesn't need to like you. But the people who do are the ones you want to do business with, right?
That's right.
So yeah, it's okay if people don't like you. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, we always said that there's a few different people that might not like you. So if you're trying to hire somebody and they don't like you, that's probably good, because 6 months in, they're going to realize they don't like you. And if they have, hey, how do you learn more about my company? Go listen to our podcast. Go read our blogs. Go check out our social media. Engage with it. See what you think. Is this a place you want to be? Do you think I'm full of it? You know, I kind of want to be around that guy. Perfect.
Yes.
Or a new customer, or an existing client, or just people in general. And because, like you just said, there's so many people out there. But going into that content thing, it was like that was the connecting point to people say, I'm intrigued by that. And it led to, can you do that for me? Not exactly what we're doing, to say, can you help us with that? So we built a content marketing company on the heels of all that, which has been so much fun. And then we started podcasting and doing all this. And then we get to have conversations with people like yourself. And then I see this background, mortgage and banking. And then you lead into content and you're like, people might be like, what are you doing now? Right? What happened to Shondell? So I want to learn a little bit about that. You're in the mortgage business, and when were you in the mortgage business? Because that's gone. I mean, it's going through it again. Like, the mortgage industry is just all over the place right now. It's crazy. But when were you in the mortgage business, and when did you start to realize, like, wow, I want to start making different kinds of connections here?
So I started in the banking world at 18. So I've been in this world for a really, really long time. I'm 40 now. So what's that? 22 years. So right out of high school, I started in banking and worked my way up through the bank. And then I left the bank and started working for an insurance company called Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So they're the same thing as PMI here in the US, but they're part of the federal government in Canada. So once I was working there, I also had a property that I had purchased that I lived in, and then I had a rental property at that time. And I paid both of them off in a short period of time, both mortgages off in a short period of time. And I told my girlfriend, and she suggested that I start giving people advice on how I paid off the mortgages so quickly. So she suggested that she's very tech savvy. I knew nothing about any of blogging or anything like that before, but she suggested that I start blogging. So I literally taught myself how to do that, created my own WordPress website, and I was just intrigued by how this all worked. And I became part of the whole personal finance community. And then my blog started to get popular. Radio stations were contacting me, magazines were contacting me, just wanting to hear my story. And then that led to me working with a lady called Gail Vaz-Oxlade. So she's the Susie Orman, but of Canada. So while I was working with her, companies started contacting me, wanting me to write for them. Now, I was still working at CMHC at the time. So now I was writing for companies, and I started getting so busy that I just couldn't do all of it myself because I still had a full-time job, and I would write on the weekends and in the evenings. And my boyfriend, who is now my husband, suggested that I just hire some writers. So I thought, well, that's a good idea. Why don't I just do that? And that's what I did. I just started hiring writers. And then what I noticed was happening was, because I was still in the financial industry world, but I was also writing for companies. And while I was part of the whole personal finance community, a lot of people were asking me questions about not only how to pay off mortgages, but how to get a mortgage, how to buy their first home, how to buy rental property. They were asking me those questions, but they were not asking me those questions because I worked in the financial industry. They were asking me those questions because I was blogging about my experience. And I knew that at that point, there was a disconnect between the information that was inside of financial institutions and how that information was getting out to the public and how that information was getting out to their ideal customers. Because people who are asking me for advice are the bank's ideal customers, right? Their customers are people who are wanting to buy a house, get investments, get car loans and credit cards, all that kind of stuff. But there was a disconnect. That's where I knew I could help to bridge that gap because I come from that world and I know the information in there, and I know that it's not getting out the way they need it to get out. And that's how Varsity Media was born. And that's how we started writing for financial institutions.
So you started writing, you started creating content. Did you have this intent that you wanted the radio stations to call, that you wanted other people to reach out to you as a result of this? Or was it more along the lines of you just wanted to start to tell stories, to create content? Did you have this ultimate goal, expectation, end point that you wanted to get to where people would start reaching out to you?
I didn't even know people got paid to. See, I don't come from a world of entrepreneurs and people who are self-employed. I come from a world where all of my family, they're employees. They work for companies. And in Canada is very run by large corporations, really large corporations. Like the bank that I work with, they started in like the 1800s. Like it's not like here in Georgia where it's run by small businesses. There, most people work for a company and stay there for 20, 30 years and then retire. Here, a lot of people have their own business. So it's just different. And growing up and being born in Canada, and like I said, I've just lived here for 6 years, I was a part of that mindset. And it wasn't until I met my husband, and he's always been an entrepreneur. He was speaking into my ear all the time and is like, you can do this, you can start your own company. But that was never my intention when I was blogging. It was literally my friend just said, you should help some people do what you've done. And that was my only goal, is to give some advice, share some insight that I've gained over the years on how I bought, how I sold, and just my experience. I wanted to just share that. And it led to that. I had no clue.
Yeah.
People are going to pay attention.
Do you have a writing background?
No, not at all. That's why I hired writers, because there's got to be people better than me at writing.
Okay.
No, my degree is in marketing.
Okay.
I went to college for marketing, and then I went to university for marketing and business. My degree is in business. So I realized, and that's what I like. So I just moved out of the writing and said my expertise is better to manage and to market and things like that versus writing. I remember having a conversation with my husband, and I said, there's got to be people who write better than me.
Yeah.
I just figured it's better for me to focus on what I enjoy more and what I'm better at. And then I've got writers and editors that.
Well, and then it also sounds like when you talk to other companies, you're asking them to do what they do best and to bring services. It's the same thing as what we've done. So whether it was the insurance business, if we work with a wealth manager, they might not have the background in insurance planning, let's say, and business planning and those types of things. And so they want to bring in people that's what they do. You go do what you do best. And then on the marketing side, we're very similar in that way. It's different because we have different niches and target markets, all that, but it's the same thing. It's like, go focus on what you do best. If you continue to add on to it, well, then you have to give something up, because how much capacity do you have? Now, I would always encourage, and you can tell me this too, I think that creativity is so important for a business. I've seen it. If you can just have a creative spark as opposed to always working on the mundane, even if it's just thinking about ideas, Right. Hey, Shondell, I want to talk about this idea. I want to talk about that idea. Well, that's creativity because you're thinking through things. You might not be the one that's able to write about it or take pictures of it and do a video about it, but at least you have this creative spark. Do you see that it helps the people that you work with when they have a little bit of creativity in their world? Do you see that?
I do. People who are able to think outside of the box, most definitely, especially in the financial industry world, because banks are very old in terms of just banks, credit unions. They've been around for a long time. And I'm not talking about the new modern ones where, they've got the online banks and things like that. But the traditional banks have been around for a very, very long time. And what has worked 20 years ago may not necessarily work now, right? Like everything's about Google, Amazon, and Facebook right now. Everything is online. And when I was blogging, that was proof. People were asking questions online, and they're not necessarily asking experts those questions. They're asking whoever they can find online. So it's very important to always understand the customer and be where they are. That's all that matters, is understanding who your target audience is and showing up where they are. Because once you know who they are and you show up where they are, that gives you so much insight on what they want. So then it becomes easy to bridge the gap. You know what they want. You know the questions they're asking. You know the problems they have. Now you can just look and say, does my financial institution have these products and services to help them bridge the gap? You don't even need to sell yourself once you understand your customer and you're in front of them answering their questions. That will sell in and of itself, right? Because they'll want to know, well, if you're helping me answer all of these questions, you can probably help me get a mortgage. Right. So it's just connecting the dots.
Right. Who better to trust if you're the one providing this information really for free? And I can just learn about it. And it's not for everybody. And that's the thing people get caught up in, is they're trying to appeal to such a broad audience, so many different people. And it becomes overwhelming because, like you just said, we said earlier on, some people don't like that. They're not interested in it. And then it like brings you down. Whereas opposed to like, but all these other people over here actually do like what you have to say. Let's just focus on them. And so they understand perhaps, or they can get to that point through you understanding maybe who their target is. Who are they talking to when they write this blog post, or when you write this blog post for them? And then how are you finding those people? Is it like, because you have this knowledge of where they might be hanging out, perhaps on social media, or what type of websites that they read, or who knows what? How are you making sure that, okay, this is your audience. Let's say they're 60 to 70-year-olds. They're possibly still in business. They like to work. They like looking at pictures of their grandkids. So they're spending a lot of time on Facebook, let's just say. Let's go to Facebook. And is that how you're doing it? Or how do you help find where their target audience might be? Because I've talked to a lot of people, they don't know where they might be spending time. They have this belief in their philosophy is, this is where they're spending time, but they could be wrong. And as long as they're open to it. So how are you finding that for them?
Because we write for financial institutions, some of them know where their target audience is. Because like I said, they've been around for a while. They've been doing business for a while.
Okay.
They're not typically new companies. So most of them know who their target audience is and already have relationships with them. The ones that don't, you have to find out. For example, my target audience is on LinkedIn. They're not really on Facebook. They're on LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn every day. I post on LinkedIn 5, 6, 7 times a day because that's where they are. And I know that the more I'm on there, the more visible I am. So it's me, my page, and I post on there. Now, banks, we do have some customers who do not know who their target audience, well, they know who their target audience is, but they don't know where they are. So if they are targeting first-time homebuyers, for example, I would suggest that they get into Facebook groups that are for first-time homebuyers or for homebuyers. So if they're targeting first-time homebuyers, they've got many groups on Facebook for first-time homebuyers. They also have groups on Facebook for repeat buyers, for people who are wanting a vacation home. Then they have groups on Facebook for people who are wanting rental properties. So you could really niche down in terms of homebuyers. There's so many different kinds of homebuyers. So you could even niche down further. Facebook has groups for a lot of different things. And the great thing about them is, for one, they're free to join. And two, they only have people who are interested in likely what you offer as a service or product. So you want to get in those groups and answer those questions, because what you'll start to notice over a period of time is patterns. Once you're in there and you're paying attention to the questions people are asking, you're paying attention to what people are posting, you'll start to get insight into problems that people are having, whether it be they want to know what their credit score needs to be, they want to know what the minimum down payment needs to be, they want to know how can they qualify for a mortgage? Whatever those questions are, you'll start to see patterns in those questions. And then you know what your target audience wants to know. So you start creating content around that. And then you take it a step further. Once you start to notice patterns that people are asking, then you start looking for keywords that people are going to be searching for on Google. Now we put those keywords into the content that we're creating. So now you hit them on social media and you hit them when they're Googling something. Of course, you're going to have to be doing search engine optimization as well, but you're hitting them in different places. So when they're searching for something in their local area, like if they're searching for a mortgage in Atlanta, Georgia, and you've got branches in Atlanta, Georgia, now we could hit them there because we're creating valuable content to answer those questions. Plus you're answering their questions on social media. So it's a win-win. It's a holistic approach that you want to take to be in different places where your target audience is. And forums are also good. Forums are also really good because people ask questions on forums. So what's so important, especially with financial institutions, is that they are the experts. So if I'm in a Facebook group and I'm asking a question, and somebody from a bank comes in and chimes in, who am I going to trust? The person from the bank or somebody that I've never even heard of, right?
Sure.
So you already come with that expert knowledge just by being an employee of a financial institution. All right. So it's just, that is one thing I suggest. You can't sell in these groups, of course, but you don't need to sell when you're providing enough value.
Right. They can understand what you do and who you are anyway. And again, one thing, quick question, because you mentioned forums, Reddit, Quora, do you spend time? Okay.
Yes. Those are great forums.
Yeah.
If that's where your target audience is.
Absolutely.
Those are just some tips, suggestions. But at the end of the day, it's wherever they are, you want to be.
So there's one thing, obviously, so we could say the insurance industry, real estate, mortgages, just banking, financial services. As we all know, there is a ton of spam. There's a ton of just people pitching product. I get hit up. You talk about LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time as well. There's a lot of great connections there, but there's also a lot of people that immediately sell me. Like the fact that they reached out to connect me gave them this right to then pitch me a product that I should buy from them. And it's overwhelming how much spam. It's not just that market, right? So many industries have this. And so what happens is you're coming in and your companies that you're working with are coming in, and they're going to be spreading a good message. They're going to be talking about things that do apply. The problem is, as we know, there's this noise that's out there. So you have to cut through all of this different noise. So for every post that you put out there, there might be 9 other posts from other people that are not like that. So you have to cut through that noise, and it's not easy to do. Have you seen this before? Because a lot of clients you might work with, they might have been a part of that noise beforehand until they made the switch. They pivoted over to now let's actually put out quality content. Let's help them out. But I definitely think it's an industry that they're just pushing. We have the best rates. We have this, we have that. And like I said, I think it becomes overwhelming and there's too much noise, and too much of something's not always a good thing. I guess to speak on that a little bit as to what you've seen and what your beliefs are in that and being in that industry.
I think that oftentimes that comes from not knowing your customer well enough. Because when you know your customer, you'll understand that they don't really care about interest rates. They really don't care about credit scores either. All they do care about is getting in the house. However, the interest rates, the credit scores, the minimum down payment is going to help them get into that house, right? Yeah. So your products will help them get to where they want to go to, but you need to speak to them based on what they want. You need to hit that emotion. You need to talk about the 4-bedroom, 3-bath house. You need to talk about the granite countertops, right? At the end of the day, people know that they can't get into that house without a mortgage. The average person won't be able to buy a house cash. So they know that they have to come to get a mortgage. They know that they're going to want to know the interest rates, the minimum down payments, the credit score. But if you can speak to them based on what they want versus based on what you think they want and what you have, you're still bridging the gap and you're still getting what you want. But it's understanding your customer and speaking their language. And this is where the Facebook groups can come in really handy, because you can see what their language is. You can see what they're talking about, and you can meet them there. Right? You can meet them where they're at. And because when you start talking about interest rates, it just goes over people's heads, right?
Yeah.
It does. You've got to talk to them based on what they want, not based on what you have.
And when you talk to them, you have to have this, and you talk about this a lot, you have to have a consistent message, a consistent posting. You talk about posting on LinkedIn 4 times, 5 times a day. Consistency is important. Now, it's hard because we're going through what's happening in the world right now. There's so many different things going on, of course, but you talk about consistency, you talk about a consistency in messaging. How have you seen it play out? Obviously, it's played out for you because you posted. You just started sharing. You just started putting things out there. And next thing you know, people are reaching out to you, and it leads to this almost like a career change in many ways, and it is a career change. But how have you seen it not only play it for yourself, but for other people, and just say, because you do sometimes like, is this even getting through to anybody? Is anyone even paying attention to it? Am I just putting stuff out on the internet with everybody else? And it's like, what am I even doing? But you have to keep showing up. You have to keep doing it. It's no different than in sales. We have someone on our team named Mitch, and he always talks about you have to keep showing up. And sometimes it's like you're banging your head against the wall. Like, I don't think anyone cares, but you just keep doing it. And next thing you know, something good happens. Is that how you see consistency? Because people have come to expect perhaps that you're going to be putting this thing out there, but that's a big word, consistency. So go on that one for a little bit.
Yes, consistency is key because especially when it comes to financial institutions, like buying a house is people's biggest purchase, right? So it's a huge decision and people need to trust you. They need to feel like they know you. They need to obviously like you. That's what the consistency does. It builds that know, like, and trust factor. And like we were talking about earlier, and if they don't like you, that's fine, right? They're not the customer for you. But you do have to be consistent simply because there are so many people trying to get the attention of your ideal customer as well, right? So, and you could be consistent in so many different ways. Consistency is not always written content. Consistency could be quotes. Consistency could be video. It could be audio. It could be infographics. So you don't always have to think that you have to write 1,000-word blog post per day. And if you do write 1,000-word blog post, you can use that one blog post over a month because you can break it up into so many different things that I just mentioned. You can take snippets from that and post that on social media. You can turn some of that into video. You can turn some of that into audio. You can turn some of that into graphics. You can turn some of it into infographics. I mean, there are so many different things you can do with one piece of content to make it last a long period of time. So just think about different ways and don't make it a chore. I think sometimes people think it's, oh my gosh, how am I going to post that many times per day? But you can literally turn your iPhone on yourself and record a 30-second video. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could be one tip. Like you can take one blog post, let's say top 10 tips for buying your first home. Each of those tips could be 10 different videos. All right. So it's all how you look at content and just be easy on yourself and just think of what would your customers want to know? What would your ideal customers want to know? Post consistent.
Yeah. Just build that habit, right? I mean, I think there's that habit of posting consistently. And there's also just that creativity that we talked about. And the more you open that up, it leads to so many other things. The financial services industry has gone through some stuff, though, as it relates to content. There's compliance that's involved with it. There's concerns that this doesn't apply here. I think about it's different, but the iPhone or Facebook, when BlackBerry was really big, when the iPhone came out, people were like, no, that's not for business. I'll never use that. Well, now go look around. Everyone has. And if they don't, they have some other smartphone that's just like it. Or Facebook, it's like, oh, those kids are always on the Facebook. We'll never get on the Facebook. And who's on Facebook? We talked about now. It's grandparents, it's other people, and there's Facebook groups. So that's changed a lot. But these are the people that said they would never do this thing. Well, financial services is just the same thing. It's like, we don't need a podcast. We don't need this. We don't need to post content. That doesn't make sense. We'll use it to recruit. We'll go on LinkedIn and we'll use it as a recruiting tool. A lot of people think LinkedIn still, I talk to people like, oh, that's just for recruiting. And I'm like, wow, because you talk to a lot of people, Nate, like yourself, and you understand what LinkedIn has the potential to do. No doubt it can be used for recruiting. There's just a lot of tools here. Well, the financial services industry is this laggard community. It's archaic in many ways. They're sticking to things that have worked many, many years ago, and they're tried and true, no doubt about it. But the things evolve as well. And we are starting to see it. We're even noticing it very clearly because we have a lot of connections and people that we talk to in the financial services space that are starting to become very interested in creating content. And we're working with a lot of those types of people. But it's still early. It's not totally there yet. Do you see that evolving even more to where more and more financial services companies will create content, and the content that we're talking about that's actually offering value, that's talking about that's something interesting, that might create attention for the work that they're doing? Do you see that continuing, or do you see that perhaps that there's enough of them to go around, but you see that there's so many people still that are still way behind as thinking about how content's going to work in the financial services industry?
I don't focus on the ones that are not interested in the content.
Sure.
I focus on the ones that are interested in the content because I'm a big believer. I don't really try to convince people to do something. I think that we put out so much valuable content on our website, on social media, on LinkedIn, that when they're ready, they'll come.
Yeah.
That's my philosophy.
And that's kind of the question, though, is do you think that more and more people will come? Because I'm with you. don't convince the unconvincible, all that stuff. I'm there with you. Do you think that more and more will come? Because as more and more come, it's just going to, like, your choice of the people you want to work with is going to be unlimited because there's going to be so many of them. Do you think more and more come, or and I think they will, because as generations hand off businesses, that you'll have this younger crowd perhaps that's the driving force behind, no. When we research a business, do you have a podcast? Do you have a blog? Do you post consistently on LinkedIn? If you don't do those things, I'm questioning what it is that you are doing. I'm not saying it's a bad business, but I guess so the thing is, to rephrase a little bit, do you think more and more people will come into the space to wanting to create content from the financial services space?
They are already coming. They are coming in droves, especially since the pandemic, because they really had to step back and say, how else can we reach our customers because they can't come into the branch?
Yeah.
So they were looking for ways to still be there virtually because they couldn't be there physically. So they are coming. And I think that a lot of them are seeing that the value in content. So the shift is happening. The shift was happening before the pandemic, but I think it's happening faster now. And also keep in mind that traditional banks are also competing with online banks. And there's a whole bunch of them. And now Google has entered this space. Yeah. So there's a lot of changes happening in the industry. So content has been here for a long time. It's still here and it will always be here. So whether they just have to make that decision, do they want to continue the way they were? And if they don't make that shift, if they're not doing much online, it's unfortunate, but they're just going to be left behind, right? Because people are going online. They are online. Yeah. That's where their target audience is.
Yeah.
Service and product they have, their target audience is online. Whether or not they want to see it or not, that's just the reality that we're in. So you want to be a part of that, or else they're just not going to find you. They're just not, and out of sight, out of mind. Yeah. That's also the part of being consistent, right? If people aren't seeing you, they'll forget about you.
Yeah.
Simply because there's just so much information being put on the web.
For sure. And the other thing is, so even if we do know about the business, I see this as it's the background check. I came across you somewhere. I met someone at your company. I maybe came across an article you wrote. Well, I want to check it all out. That's what I was saying before. I have an article about it and I talk about it a lot. It's this new credit check. So when you reach out and say, hey, I would like to be on your podcast. Well, guess what I do? I have to go research you now. I have to go. So the first thing is the door opener. Do I even see the message? Number one. Well, then if you see it, well, now I can go and check out your LinkedIn profile. I can do a Google search. I can find your website. I can find what you're all about. I can see your background. So before we ever talk, oh, you're from Toronto. I know you live in Atlanta. Saw the mortgage industry. It helps to even have a conversation with that person if you do end up having a conversation. But I get to say, you know what? I saw some stuff and I don't like it. That wasn't the case here, of course, but that's what people do. And they're doing it to me. We do it to people all the time. It's no different if you want to buy a product on Amazon, if you want to stay in Airbnb and you want to read what other people said about it. You want to see the background. What's the story they tell about the place that you're going to buy? It's no different than if you're in the mortgage industry, the insurance industry, the content marketing industry, all of these different things. So I think that background check is so important. Actually, we were talking about this too. In the mortgage industry, there's so much you have to go through to even qualify for a mortgage. There's underwriters and they're checking all of these things out. It's the same thing as it relates to your personal brand, right? Or to your company's brand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're 100% right. Us connecting is that exact. You could have just said, I don't like how she looks. I don't like what she does. I'm not going to have her on my podcast. And that would have been okay because we probably wouldn't have had such a great conversation that we're having right now. Right. So that's why it's great to have as much things as you can online because people can check you out before they even make that connection. And maybe they don't want to make that connection. And again, that's okay. Right. So that's why the consistency of showing up and just being there, because when the right people see you, they will want to connect. And those are the best relationships when there's that synergy, right? You knew that I was from Toronto before we even came on that podcast, right? That just creates that synergy because now we can talk about Toronto. You lived in Buffalo. Right. It's great. And you were able to just do that by spending a minute or two on my LinkedIn profile. And that's where companies need to be, right? Where people can check them out. Like you said, check out their podcast, check out their blog, check out their social media, see what other people are saying about them. That's really important too, because, you know, I can post whatever I want, but what are other people saying about me? What are other people saying about Varci Media? That's key as well. And like you were saying, when you go on Amazon, and you want to buy a product, you're checking out the reviews because you want to see, okay, well, someone already bought this product. Let me see if they had a good experience. before I spend my money and buy that product. And that's what reviews do. That's what testimonials do.
Yeah.
And that, like I said, that's all online.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And you talked about too, like the speed of which things are happening. They're always had with the tech, and the rate of change is unbelievable. But then you have the pandemic and things are moving faster. There was people that I would talk to on the telephone or all the time. And then what changes is Zoom, right? All of a sudden Zoom comes around. So people who would never even consider putting their face on a video chat with someone else are now doing it. Like, they're almost doing it too much, right? Like, let's have another Zoom call. Like, let's not. But it's been really great that you see that rate of change and things are moving faster because of everything. So there are some positives in that.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious though, because you're from Toronto. I don't know if you still have family in Canada. You talk about Buffalo and you couldn't go over the border. I have friends that have houses there. They can't go to their house. They can't go back and forth. So what do? What has that been like with the pandemic? Like, you can't really travel. We were talking about as we were getting started. What do you do with that? You can't do certain things that you used to do before. And that's very frustrating. And I'm just curious as to really how you're going through that personally, because like you just said, you have family in Toronto. Like, who's in Toronto and when's the last time you saw them?
Well, I just had a baby a year ago. So my mom was actually just here for 3 months, 2019. And I talked to her twice a day. Well, yeah, I talk to her every single day. My mother-in-law is in Toronto as well. My brother is in Toronto. Like, I have a lot of family in Toronto. But Toronto's a 2-hour flight from Atlanta. So we see them all the time. Like, my aunts were here last year. We usually go to Toronto every single year anyways. So this year, obviously, is canceled out. We won't be going to Toronto. But it hasn't been that difficult simply because I feel like I just saw my mom for 3 months last year. And we had so many family visiting because we had just had a baby. So everybody wanted to see him. So I don't really feel that it's not that difficult because I talk to them so often and we can video chat and stuff like that. So I still feel like they're close. But personally, the traveling has mainly took an impact on just us because we travel as a family a lot. And we haven't really been able to do that just because I'm just cautious because my kids are 5 and 1. My son turned 1. So they're still young. I saw my daughter licking our counter the other day. So I'm like, do I want to bring her?
No, you don't.
So we're just a little cautious about the whole traveling. That's why I was saying the Airbnb. But even then, we're going to have to wipe everything down because if she starts licking the counter there.
Yeah.
So that's probably been the most difficult, is just us having that itch to, we want to go somewhere. We got to get away.
Yeah.
And just thinking of how we can do that safely.
Yeah. Yeah. Change of scenery is good. But at the same time, like, it's not the same, right? Things aren't the same. You have this vibe about you that's very positive. It's happy, you're smiling. It's like there's good things. You're creating a lot of, obviously you love what you do. And I think that has a big part of it. You're part of this content creation process, which I think there's a lot of creativity. So I think it lends itself to just having a positive outlook on things. Do you see that has helped you through this unprecedented times, or I don't even know what the word is. I think you just throw the words out of what it means, because who knows? But do you think that, like, all that's going on, that you're doing something that you really love, and then so that allows you to focus and not be so blindsided by all the other stuff that's surrounding you that's here?
It is difficult because people are suffering, people are dying from the pandemic. I think that I've always been the believer of, you choose your happiness. You choose to wake up every single day and be happy. You choose to look for things to be grateful for, or you can choose to look for things to complain about. And I understand the power of energy, and the more things I'm grateful for, the more things will come into my life to be grateful for. Mm-hmm. So I've always understood that. And I'm very conscious of my thoughts and how I think. And that just helps to be more positive. I could complain about the kids being home and not being able to work, or I can enjoy the time that I have with them that I wouldn't normally have because they'll be at school and daycare. So it's all about your outlook on life and looking for the things to be grateful for, because you can outnumber the things to be grateful for versus the things not to be grateful for, and simplify it. Well, you woke up this morning. Yeah. I have a computer that I can actually have a conversation with somebody who lives in a different state. Yeah. I mean, there's many people in the world that don't have things that we have just living in America that we take for granted. And my husband, being from Jamaica and growing up completely different, he's very positive. And the people you surround yourself with as well helps as well. But I always choose to look at the bright side of things. It doesn't mean I don't have problems like the other person, but I think it's all perspective. It's how you look at life. And I try to be positive because I don't want to hear myself complain. And if I don't want to hear myself complain, I'm sure my kids and husband don't want to hear.
That's right. Well, yeah. I mean, you have 5 and a 1-year-old. My goodness. I mean, I was always thinking about how old do you want your kids to be during a time like this? And I don't know what there's not a right or wrong answer.
There's no age. Because I mean, if they were older, I would be a little concerned with school.
Yeah.
Because they could be at a critical age that, they could be going to university. How would we deal with that if you're not going to school?
Yeah.
Versus a 5-year-old, I've taught her how to read already. She's good. We have a ton of workbooks that I understand.
Yeah.
If my child was taking calculus, I couldn't help you.
That's right. Trust me. Yeah.
What I mean, like, learning how to read, I can handle that.
Right.
So, there's different challenges with different ages. But again, I think it's perspective, right? If my child was older, I would just get an online tutor, right? So it's just thinking outside of the box and looking for ways to get through this, because we're all in this together. And how do we be that bright light for someone else who may be suffering?
Yeah, no, that's simplify it, I think, is what you said. And I think that's really strong. It's hard because things then keep happening. Coronavirus is going on. And I was like, well, nothing will ever take that out of the news cycle. And it hasn't been taken out of the news cycle. And then with George Floyd, and then the protests, and then the movements that we have going on. And it's important that these conversations take place and that people are talking about it. And then it's like, you know what? Enough's enough. Like, this has gone on far too long. We need to have these conversations. And you're in Atlanta, and certain cities around the country have been impacted. You see it on the news, and it's so hard because like the news is what the news is. And I get it. But in a city like Atlanta, and there were situations there, it's like, wow, like someone was already punching me. And now like there's more and more. And you wake up every day and you're like, what's next? It seems like you have this mindset of bring it on. I have my philosophies, and I have my thoughts, and I have my beliefs. But at the same time, it's tough because you throw in like, I can't see my family, I got my work to do, I got to raise my kids. You have this whole situation with the pandemic, and then just so much going on in the world today. I guess that goes back to the same point we were talking about before. When you're focused and when you're honed in, you can still have those conversations, but those conversations won't take you away from what matters most to you and your family.
Absolutely. I never start my day watching the news.
Yeah.
I don't even watch the news, actually. I don't watch the news at all. What I do is I'll Google the updates of the virus to see how are we going to maneuver. But I don't watch the news just because I have to remain in a positive frame of mind. And it's very difficult to do that when I'm watching the news all the time. And I control my day in terms of I have a routine in the morning that will help to set the tone for my day. And it doesn't mean that I am insensitive to the issues that are happening in the world. I just don't allow those issues to overtake my world. So you could be in it, but not of it, right? And that is my mindset. Now, it doesn't mean that I won't do what I can to make a positive impact in someone else's life, knowing that they may have the virus. What can I do for you? Can I order some groceries and have that delivered to your house? How could I help you? I think my impact in this world is greater that way than filling my mind with things that are going to bring me down, right? Because if I'm brought down, how could I be of value to you, right? It doesn't mean that I'm not sensitive to what you're going through. It just means that I try to control my thoughts in a way that I'm not depressed all day, right? So It's just a different outlook that I choose to have to try to make a more positive impact on this world.
Well, I mean, I don't allow it. You talk about simplifying it. I don't allow it. These things are going to happen. They're inevitably going to happen. Sometimes they're maybe not so extreme, but nonetheless, you might wake up at 3 a.m. because your child's sick. That's always been like a game. That's a simple one because it's just in your house. It doesn't affect anybody else but your family right then and right there. And what are you going to do? Well, you got to rise to the occasion. You can't just not deal with it. Well, you have a big day coming up. So what are you going to do about it? And it doesn't mean you won't be exhausted the next day or whatever, but then you roll with it, I guess. And you have to deal with that. I don't want to say it's a burden, but you have to deal with those situations and do the most you can with it. And that's what builds character, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's called life. I don't think anybody is immune from problems. It's perspective. It's all how you deal with the problems. You're going to deal with things that I have to deal with too, and we may deal with different things. But if you're on Earth, you're going to have some form of problems, right? It's just how we choose to deal with those problems, right?
Yeah.
Are we going to let it kill us, or are we going to let it make us stronger?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the reason why talking to someone like yourself, having done this podcast, you sharing this message, these are things that I know if someone listened to it, if it was just me who had this conversation with you, that's important. If it's just John on my team or someone else or someone who's considering working with us or not, and just someone who can just gather something from it, to hear you talk about it, Shondell, I think is very important. And it's great of you to spend the time to do these things because you undoubtedly very busy with a lot going on. You could probably pick anything to do and you could be busy for that entire day. So it's very important. So I appreciate you sharing this and having your positivity just shine through the screen. And hopefully we can get past this pandemic and all this, and we can meet in person at some point.
Yes.
We'll get there. It'll happen. So I appreciate you reaching out. And like you said during this, you don't think social media works, you don't think content works. Well, we're talking because of LinkedIn, because of messaging, because of conversation, because of a podcast. And we don't meet if it's not for those things. And this is during a time when people really aren't leaving their hometowns. They're not even leaving their home. And so these things can happen. They can be worked through. Content, I always say content is the answer. Create content. That's the answer. What's the question, right? And it's fun to talk to someone like you with your mindset and have all that. And hopefully people listening, I want them to understand or figure out how they can get a hold of you. Where should they reach out to you? Obviously LinkedIn, but where's your LinkedIn profile and where else?
Shondell Varcianna is my LinkedIn profile. I'm on there all the time, always creating content. So definitely you can also get me on my website, varcimedia.com, VARCI media.com. You can reach out to me there as well. Yeah, I'm always online.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I'm an online company, so we're always.
Yeah, you have a clear focus. You know where your target is, clarity in it, and you simplify it. And you just make it easy and a positive attitude with everything that you deal with, whether it was now or before or what'll come up. So, Shondell, I appreciate everything today. It's great chatting with you.
Thank you for having me. Awesome being on your show. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
One of my favorite things about CADSource is the opportunity to chat with amazing business leaders and entrepreneurs. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn or visit us at cadsource.com. Thank you for listening to this CADSource production, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time. This episode exists because of CADSource. CADSource is your content team. You know how many business leaders need help communicating their story? That's what we do. Content strategy, creation, and distribution for business leaders. This provides opportunities, relationships, and a platform for you and your business. Why do we do this? Because at CADSource, we exist to help you create and share amazing content. And yes, you should have a podcast. We'll help you. Learn more by visiting cadscontent.com.